Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the second session of our 5-part webinar series. Today we will be covering dementia and COVID-19, looking at the impact of the pandemic on a person with dementia. This topic will discuss what to consider when accessing and anticipating needs and behaviours and how to prepare as best as possible. Once again, we are joined by Sweet Tree's Dementia Service Manager and Clinical Specialist, Alexis Sobrano, who I will now pass you over to. Hi, Alexis.
Hello, thank you, Helen, and welcome everyone. And for those of you who joined us last week, welcome again. We're very happy that you've joined us again. Today, we'll be talking about dementia and the impacts of COVID-19. We'll be providing some insight on how the pandemic, lockdown, and social distancing has impacted people with dementia and their family members, while also providing some tips on assessing and intervening in new and changed needs. If you have any questions at all, you can use the chat box. Helen will be monitoring the chat box for a Q&A, so do feel free to send your questions through at any point. And if I'm going a bit too fast, let Helen know and I'm happy to slow down. Can we check that everyone can hear us okay? And see the slides. Okay, we got a thumbs up, great. Okay, just if we can get a few more thumbs up.
Yes, yeah.
Great.
Getting some, yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Looking good. This is our second in our series of webinars, so we are still just finding our feet a bit, but that's great that you can all hear and see us. Still letting some people in as well. Great, okay.
Okay, so we're going to first discuss the impacts of social measures that have been put in place on a person with dementia. So what I want everyone to think about just for a moment first is how the lockdown and how social distancing has impacted us. And you can take how it's impacted a person without cognitive impairment and really magnify that for somebody who has a cognitive impairment and can't really make sense of everything that's going on. With somebody who has cognitive impairment, they may have, some issues with retaining the why. So why things are different, why they can't partake in their normal routines, perhaps why people aren't visiting as often, and also coping with those changes is a bit more difficult because of the impairment in brain functioning. Whereas somebody with a normal healthy brain has more cognitive reserve to really cope with change and cope with things that are difficult, somebody with dementia may not have that ability, depending on the stage. So when we're talking about social distancing, so keeping that 2-meter distance apart from people and not interacting as closely with people, we really have to think about how social routines have been interrupted for people with dementia, which can really lead to boredom and loneliness, which has really happened for everyone. For somebody with dementia who perhaps relies a lot on a day center or a support worker to come in and provide a lot of that companionship, once that's taken away, it can create a lot of anxiety, restlessness, some agitation, and potentially even apathy or loss of interest. So we may see more pacing, behaviors that we haven't seen before, and an exacerbation of more challenging behaviors, perhaps that were there before, and somebody not really understanding what they have to do today or how to entertain themselves. With the orders to self-isolate, likewise, we see really interrupted routines. So again, not really doing what we're usually doing, maybe not going to normal stores, normal cafes, coffee shops, day centers. Again, feeling that bit of boredom and loneliness, but also think about the closer family monitoring that's going on. So if there are multiple family members in the home who are self-isolating potentially, suddenly the household is a lot busier and people are around. There are a lot of different noises going on, perhaps that aren't usually present in the household. There also may be the introduction of new caregivers. So if family members are self-isolating in their own homes and they don't live with their family member who has dementia, potentially you've engaged an agency such as Sweet Tree to come in and provide some support, and that's a completely new routine for the person with dementia to cope with. That can also create a bit of anxiety and agitation, disruption in sleep patterns. Maybe somebody's getting a bit bored during the day, so they're napping more, so their sleep pattern is flipped a bit. may see some wandering and pacing due to boredom as well. That anxiety may be displayed in a wandering or pacing behavior, and perhaps even increased awareness of somebody's cognitive limitations, because if the family's around and they're getting a bit more help, they may be a bit more aware that they need that increased assistance at home. With infection control measures that have been put in place, such as wearing the masks, gloves, potentially aprons, a person with dementia may have a poor understanding of why that needs to happen to protect them and to protect others, and may not easily accept assistance or encouragement to, say, wash their hands or use hand gels if they're out, and even avoid touching their face. So that can be quite stressful for somebody if they're constantly being told to wash their hands. If they don't like being touched or they have issues with water, that can be quite difficult to cope with. In terms of the PPE, gloves, masks, and face shields may hinder somebody's ability to recognize someone. So if your face is partially covered, or if a support worker's face is partially covered, that may not allow the person with dementia to easily recognize who you are, creating potentially some fear and agitation as well, and increased confusion. I'm just going to pause there to see if there have been any questions.
Haven't got anything in the chat box just yet. You weren't having anything come through to you, were you, Alexa? Oh, here we go. Sorry, just checking it was working. Okay, we've got a question here. Do you have any suggestions on how to deal with these issues?
Yes, so we'll definitely get to that later on in the presentation here, but in terms of infection control measures, what I can say is mirroring tends to work really well. So washing hands and using gels at the same time can work really well for somebody who has cognitive impairment. And really that's with any personal care activity, brushing teeth, brushing hair. If you can do it alongside someone, that may help them to mirror the process a bit better. So making it a together activity tends to work with some of the infection control measures. And we'll get into more detail about that later on in the presentation. So impacts of the pandemic on the whole of somebody with dementia can be quite vast and varied based on somebody's individual history and what they've dealt with in the past. It may really be difficult for somebody to rationalize those changes that are going on around them. There's potential for re-traumatization. So depending on somebody's stage in their dementia, if their long-term memory is really what they're relying on most, and they have prior traumatic experience, for example, of living through a health crisis, war, any kind of food rationing, forced isolation, or a negative hospital experience, the pandemic could bring some of that up. And now that could be things that family members were aware of already and can prepare for, or it perhaps can be something that's completely new to family members. They weren't aware that their loved one had experienced any of this in the past, and it's just coming up as brand new. So that can be surprising at times for family members to discover, or even to cope with themselves, to try and keep somebody calm and keep a calm environment for their loved one. Social isolation measures can also induce feelings of being held inside against a person's will. So if the person with dementia is not able to retain or understand why they can't go outside and engage in their normal routines, they may feel like they're being held somewhere against their will, which can create a lot of behaviors, negative behaviors as well, such as some aggression, agitation, or wanting to leave suddenly. If family members and friends are self-isolating, somebody may feel abandoned, forgotten, or neglected, so they may not really be able to retain why they're not getting as many visitors as they're used to, why they haven't seen their family members in so long. And now I will say we've been using FaceTime and Zoom a lot to connect family members who are apart from each other. So our support workers have been facilitating that. And for somebody who it's not going to create more confusion, that's an excellent tool to use during this time. We have to remember also that tactics used by the government and media to encourage people to socially distance and stay at home can really be usually based on fear. So a person with dementia, if they're constantly having that input, may feel really anxious, but not recall exactly why they're feeling anxious and not remember what triggered that anxiety. So they may carry that feeling of anxiety through the day or through a few days. So it's really important that we're mindful of the inputs that are going on in the house. So how much news people are watching, what kind of information that they're getting, because that can cause changes in behavior as well. And then really to remember that our own anxieties can transfer onto our family members. So really trying to stay calm around our family members who may have cognitive impairment is very important as well, because they may pick up on how we're feeling and mirror that back to us.
Alexis, we've got a good question here. A person is asking, how can you help your parent who is coping alone at home with the other parent who has dementia, when they normally have clubs and other activities? Obviously, under social distancing, you're limited to what you can do.
So really key here is to try and establish a routine and try and mimic those needs that were being met by those routines in the house. So it can be creating a schedule of little 5-minute activities, both one-to-one and solitary activities that we can put in place. And they don't have to be long activities of 30 minutes to an hour. They can really be short, soothing activities, and try and adapt what we were doing outside really to this new environment. And there are a variety of excellent tools that we can look to online, different kind of games and supports that are really out there on the internet, which I also list later. The NHS has a variety of resources that you can look to for ideas on games and exercise and different routines that you can implement throughout the day to maintain that routine. It's the same with waking up and going to sleep, trying to keep as much of a routine as possible so that everyone feels that their day is structured, also a bit predictable. Any follow-up question on that, Helen?
No, that's great, thank you.
So I thought it was very important to also talk about the impact of the changed home environment on a person with dementia. So much like we're seeing, sudden changes can take us a while to adjust to. Now, an individual with dementia will have more so of a difficult time adjusting. Sudden changes in home care arrangements, for example, if families are suddenly not able to visit as often or not comfortable visiting relatives due to risks potentially, they may engage a home care agency. So suddenly your loved one is having somebody new in the house, perhaps someone that they've not met before coming in, either an increase of care or conversely a decrease in care. So many people have chosen to stop certain home care visits that they didn't feel were critical, and suddenly a person with dementia, where they're used to having that routine and the same support worker coming in and engaging them, perhaps taking them out in the neighborhood, engaging in activities at home, that's lessened. There are also sudden changes in care team members. So for family members who are self-isolating, potentially not seeing that family member routinely, care team members who choose to self-isolate for particular reasons not coming, and changes in care team members really being disruptive for a person with dementia, and that can be difficult to cope with. Also, suddenly family members are at home instead of work. So if people are working from home, there may be increased noise and chaos in the house, and not only more people around, but potentially taking phone calls and different stimulation than somebody's used to. So really we can see a theme of disrupted routines, creating a lot of confusion, anxiety, potentially some insecurity and anger. What's very important for us to remember is that an individual with dementia may not really be able to articulate how they're feeling, and so how they're feeling may come out in their behavior. So you may hear this spoken about a lot as a challenging behavior or a difficult behavior. I think we really need to start calling them coping behaviors, because what it's really doing is helping them cope with that changed environment. And we really need to look at what's causing those changes and try and intervene prior. Any questions, Helen, here?
You touched on this a little bit before, Alexis, but somebody's asking, how do I explain the situation to a person with dementia? So I guess it's more the actual, the things that they wouldn't really understand that are happening around them.
Sure. So I would suggest that you keep it as basic as possible, that you tell the person, of course, depending on what stage they're in and how much they can understand, as to not make them feel like a child, but really keep it basic and say, there's a very serious flu going around right now. We have to stay inside as much as possible because it's very contagious, and kind of take it from there. So just explaining it as a very serious flu that we're trying to protect ourselves from. Therefore, we have to stay inside a bit more. And when we go outside, we have to keep a bit of a distance from people just in case they're not feeling well. So really keeping it basic. Don't base it on fear. So try not to use scare tactics to say you might get sick or I don't want something to happen to you. Just really keep it very basic. And it's a very serious flu. We're trying to keep distance so that we can protect ourselves from getting sick and protect other people as well. So I also wanted to touch a bit on what would happen, how would somebody present if they had dementia and also started experiencing symptoms of coronavirus. So it's very important to recall what delirium is. So very briefly, delirium is a very acute, sudden onset of an increase in confusion, so a sudden change in your relative. Now, this happens a lot of the time with somebody who has an infection, for example. They may suddenly show a change in behavior, a very acute change in presentation. So that increased confusion, potentially some agitation, aggression, anxiety, hyper or hypoactivity. So that's an increase in activity, or even a decrease in activity where they're not responding as much, or maybe a bit slower than usual, drowsier and sleepier than usual. See a decline in their usual abilities and potentially even hallucinations. So we may, if somebody has mild coronavirus, they may also experience a delirium alongside of the coronavirus. And so I wanted to make people aware, just so you could look out for these signs and symptoms of delirium, get in touch with your GP, explain what's going on. Delirium, as I said, is an acute, sudden onset of an increase of confusion or change. So it's not that gradual change that we're seeing with cognitive impairment. And that can signify a variety of things, especially infections. So just really important to get that checked out with your GP if you're seeing that very suddenly. So any sudden change, you're going to want to get in touch with your GP.
Just, sorry, Alexis, just had a question come through asking, well, saying, my relative with dementia is in a hospice. Given the isolation measures which are now in place, I'm worried I won't be able to spend time with them in their final moments.
So this is something that a lot of the hospices are dealing with, and even palliative care teams in the community, trying to minimize how many people are around for infection control measures. Firstly, you should consider wearing full PPE. So the hospice team should provide those key relatives with full PPE so that they can be with their loved one at end of life. But as well, you may want to consider teaming up with the hospice team and looking at other options such as Zoom or FaceTime, WhatsApp video calls, so that you can talk to the person and really be there with them. There's really no medicine like being with somebody who brings you comfort. So being able to do that flexibly is really important. But in the first instance, the hospice team should be providing a full PPE gear for you to be there with your loved one. And if for any reason that's not possible, you can ask to be connected by the phone or by video call. So here are some tips that we put together throughout the pandemic changes to try and help people cope as best as possible. What's really, really important is to try and stick to a routine and create a schedule throughout the day. Really by limiting naps, making sure there's orientation for daytime versus nighttime. So really letting natural light in, and think about how much caffeine somebody's having throughout the day to try and maintain their daytime, nighttime schedule. Look at scheduling meal times and eating together. So making things together activities, again, really using that mirroring to keep people engaged throughout the day. Incorporate hand hygiene as part of a routine. Wash your hands together at the same time. Really prompt somebody through those kinds of activities for hygiene and infection control. Schedule and plan activities. So look at what board games you have around, potentially puzzles, reminiscence activities, looking through family photo albums, perhaps writing some descriptions of them on the back of photos, engaging the person in utilizing their long-term memory and really engaging them around pleasant memories that they have. Maybe watch 10, 15, 20 minutes of favorite old shows and movies, talk about that, use reminiscence in that way. Listening to music can be exceptionally calming, especially music from someone's past. That may be something that they can engage in, and oftentimes we're really surprised at how somebody's memory is retained from music. Arts and crafts is a great way to engage someone as well. Think about themed discussions. So it takes a bit of planning ahead, but potentially planning some discussions for the next day around maybe more pleasant current events that are going on or past events for someone. Looking at books and also magazines. So really just setting small, achievable, routine activities throughout the day based on somebody's current abilities is a way that you can engage them and keep them in a routine. They don't have to be long activities. They can be anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes. Whatever somebody's current attention span is, that's really what you want to aim for. And also looking at what they're able to do and trying to tap into making them feel good about themselves. So not stretching them too much in the activity, but really allowing them to achieve something during that activity and making it a pleasant experience for them. Something that's very important, and it's very important for all of us, is really scheduling time for exercise. There are a variety of different types of exercises that can be adapted for indoor purposes, such as seated yoga, stretching. Housework is a great way to get exercise in. So wiping down tabletops or sweeping, hoovering, and looking at Tai Chi videos. There are really great sources on YouTube, but also the NHS has really great fitness routine videos that are anywhere from 5 minutes to about 30 minutes. And they're geared towards people who are older, so they are adapted a bit and safe. So you can always take a look at that. Helen will send around the slides after today, so you can take a look through that. We put the link there for your reference. Really important to anticipate mood changes and triggers. So keeping a diary of your loved one's behavior during this time and what may be causing certain coping behaviors is extraordinarily important, so that you can go back and look at how we can change and adapt to make that easier for everyone. For example, if somebody really dislikes getting up super early in the morning and then it sets their whole day out of the loop, then just really try and adapt maybe wake up times, shower times, meal times to suit the person. Any questions coming through, Helen?
Yeah, we've got a question saying how useful these tips are for looking after the person with dementia. But what about looking after ourselves? How can we look after, make sure that we're looking after ourselves so that we can look after the person as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is transferable, right, across to our own selves. And it just so happens that our next session is going to be on maintaining our own well-being as informal carers. So we really wanted to dedicate the next session to informal carers and maintaining well-being at home. So hopefully to get those tips, you'll sign up for the next session. It's going to be really in depth about how we can take care of ourselves when we're caring for somebody potentially full-time or even part-time with a cognitive impairment.
Okay, are there any other questions at all? If you just pop them in the chat, we can answer them.
Something else I quickly want to pick up on the tips for care is really maintaining flexibility. So what might work today may not work tomorrow. So being really flexible in our approaches is very important. And again, just really engaging in pleasant activities, anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes, maintaining some kind of a routine, and limiting that negative input potentially that's coming in through news channels or radio news, so people's anxiety maybe is lessened. So lastly, we just really wanted to commend everybody, all informal carers, for what they're doing. We're so good at, clapping for the NHS on the hour when we have to, but I think really it's important to remember that there are a lot of people who have stepped up to take care of loved ones and really are going above and beyond and juggling a lot of different different things at home. So we really just wanted to say thank you to all the informal carers. Again, hopefully you will sign up for our next session, which will be on managing well-being for carers. So somebody taking care of somebody at home with dementia. At Sweet Tree, we are available 24/7 for anything you need, any questions that you have. You can always give us a call. Helen will send out all of our information following the webinar, so you can look at how to sign up for the next one. You'll receive the slides, and you can always reach out to us with any questions.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't think there are any more questions there. And you've just covered everything for next week. Brilliant. Thank you, Alexis. Yes, if any questions at all, please reply to my email that I'll be sending out later today that has the link to next week and all of today's slides attached. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you. You can also head to our website as well. I believe there's a sign up link there. So anything you need, you can find us.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Alexis.
My pleasure.